The Republicans filed the motion claiming that challenges to some 13,000 signatures on their petition are invalid. The Republicans' petition calls for a statewide popular vote on the new congressional lines. State law says that petition signatures are valid unless there is significant evidence otherwise. The motion says the petition's challengers haven't shown that evidence. Senator Jerry Pierce is confident the court will support the Republican motion.
So it's getting to the point where it's nonsensical to continue this challenge because we know in the end they cannot prevail. Our signatures are good to start with, but even the procedure that they've used to challenge these signatures is improper. So if it was improper from the start, it's improper now during the middle, it cannot be corrected at the end.
Time is running out for the vote, and the vote supporters want the issue settled as quickly as possible. The Republicans hope for a court ruling by the end of the week. Charles Schnitzer, Action 4 at the state capitol.
Much of Drumwright sits atop a hill. That's fortunate because 7 inches of rain pounded the town in the wee hours this morning. The townspeople turned out to view the damage. Usually Tame Tiger Creek had clawed its way across downtown Drumwright, leaving debris high above its banks.
We had approximately 4 feet of water above this bridge area here. Of course, we had to stop the traffic on the highway, and a lot of trees floating down through here and some boats that had gotten loose and various items of that type.
A block upstream, the floodwater left its calling card. Don and Leela Robinson tried to ride out the flood in their creekside home, but the water rose too quickly.
I stepped down, and when I did, I stepped down in water probably about my knee. And I told him, I said, it's not going to get no lower. I said, let's get out of here.
A few miles west of town, Uchi Creek also boiled out of its banks. The rushing water choked off numerous roads in the area. This school bus was stranded halfway across the creek. The driver swam to safety, but the bus can't be reclaimed until the floodwaters recede. According to Mother Nature, that may not be anytime soon. Scott Wallace, Action 4 near Drumwright.
The doors opened at Will Rogers World Airport only to lead Braniff ticket holders to an unpleasant surprise. When they reached the counter, no one was there, and all the airline flights were canceled. The closing left almost 100 passengers stranded on the ground, the majority of which had no idea what to do.
Well, it's kind of shocking. I have to find another way real soon.
If I can find a way to Austin, I'll go. I guess if I can, I won't. What else can you do?
Despite the shock, this passenger kept his sense of humor.
Be a souvenir someday.
Ticket holders went to neighboring airlines to stand in line for another ticket, only to get a second dose of bad news. Every flight the ticket agent punched up for this lady was booked. In fact, the computer showed booked flights for the next 3 days, so she couldn't even buy or trade for another ticket. Braniff ticket holders have been told that other airlines will honor their tickets if they get some type of coupon from Braniff. But as you can see, that's going to be a little difficult for those trying to leave immediately, because the only person behind this counter is me. Sherry Sellers, Action 4 at Will Rogers World Airport.
This is a nonfiction book. It is assigned.
The largest part of the record appropriations goes towards teacher salaries. Last year, state teachers got an across-the-board raise of $1,600. The hope was to keep qualified teachers from taking higher-paying jobs in private industry. This year, the concern was the same. Legislators voted to give teachers an across-the-board raise of $1,000, plus an additional $1,000 per teacher to the school district, to be distributed the way they see fit.
Once the district has received the money from the state, they must give every teacher at least a $1,000 salary increase. But what they do with the remainder of the money that they have is up to that local Board of Education. They can do it across the board, or they can do it on a career salary schedule basis.
The legislators intend for the second chunk of money to be divided on the basis of tenure with the school system, but administrators can pick their own guidelines for the money. The base $1,000 increase will raise salary minimums to $12,000. Charles Schnitzer, Action 4.
Other airlines, like American here, are trying to fill the void left by the Braniff bankruptcy. Braniff was taking 12 flights a day out of Will Rogers. Today, some of the people counting on those flights found themselves at the ticket counters again, trying to make other arrangements.
Yesterday at the funeral home, we were talking before the funeral, and I understand Braniff went bankrupt. And here we're holding Braniff tickets to return to Minneapolis-St. Paul tonight at 7:15. So I scrounged around after the funeral, called, talked to the American people, and they were able to get the three of us, my wife, my son, and myself, out on a flight, American flight tomorrow night via Chicago and then into Minneapolis. So sitting here stuck with three Braniff tickets I don't know what I'm going to do with.
You may think the other airlines in town would be experiencing a boom now that Braniff gates have been vacated. But one airline spokesman says that's not the case.
It's one of these things where we don't have spare airplanes parked. We don't have spare crew members to fly the airplanes. You get into many ramifications in trying to do something quickly. So we're not in a position, frankly, to add a lot of additional service on very short notice.
Most of the other airlines are honoring Braniff tickets, but only on a standby basis. One airline official says that some customers are having to wait through 2 or 3 flights before they can get out. But the tickets are being honored. Ted Brown, Action 4, Will Rogers World Airport.
He said that it's about this deep. It's a good 4 feet deep, so down at the bridge.
Donna Clyburn told rescue workers how high the water was around the house where 8 of her relatives were trapped by flooding. Miss Clyburn had been in contact with them by phone, but now she could only watch as Highway Patrol and Blaine County officers traveled down the road until the water got too deep. Action 4 provided lighting equipment that rescuers would use. Before entering the cold, dark water, 2 men donned wetsuits and then tied safety lines to each other. The house they wanted to reach was only a mile away. A few hours earlier, this would have been a leisurely walk across a peaceful alfalfa field. But now it was a race against driving rain and a rising tide to save 8 women and children.
The water is just continuously rising. It's just getting worse, getting closer up to the house. Very scary situation for the children.
Richard Hassel and his mother Donna Clyburn could only watch and wait. It was nearly 11 o'clock on Sunday night, almost 4 hours from the time the first rescue crew had been called. And then came what they had been waiting for, a light. And with the light were the rescuers and 8 women and children. 10-year-old John Paul Black.
Did all of them come out? Did they all come out?
Yeah, they're all out.
Go on to the car.
Yeah, come on, life raft. 6-year-old Teddy Lee Hassel, 2-year-old Jared Clyburn, and 1-year-old Shantae Clyburn. With them were Lisa and Terry Clyburn, both 17, and Lucy Cutnose, age 40. The woman in the raft is 19-year-old Cheryl Clyburn. Like the others, Miss Clyburn had been in the house since the rain began falling Sunday afternoon. She's 7.5 months pregnant, and she received immediate attention. Miss Clyburn's quivering lips were cause for concern. It was a trying ordeal for the strongest of people, let alone a woman only 6 weeks away from childbirth. Donna Clyburn knelt over her daughter, offering love, comfort, and courage. But concern was etched on the mother's face. While the children huddled together, Mrs. Clyburn's other son described the rescue conditions.
Man, that water is deep down in there. I almost didn't make it out of there myself.
Meanwhile, Miss Clyburn was loaded onto a pickup truck and then taken to the only covered vehicle with room for her and the paramedic, the Action 4 van. We drove Miss Clyburn to a waiting ambulance, which transported her to Parkview Hospital in El Reno. All she needed was a chance to get warm. Miss Clyburn has already been released from the hospital and gone home with her family. Bill Ross, Action 4, in Geary, Oklahoma.
By 10 o'clock last night, the floodwaters of Deer Creek were rushing at close to 40 miles per hour. Over 30 volunteers from the community responded to help with the rescue effort. Dan Dillon, a college student, had been camping out when the floodwaters engulfed his campsite. In the dark and alone, Dillon braved the high waters to find safety.
It was just jumping from limb to limb and swimming when I had to. I couldn't see until they brought the lights out, and I had to stop. Otherwise, I wouldn't know where I was going.
How long are you out there?
Since 9 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. To Dan, it was 7 hours of not knowing his fate. Earlier in the evening, rescuers had worked fast and furious to save another flood victim, Don Yarborough.
Okay, well, the first gentleman lost his car, and he was in, and all that was up was the antenna, and he was sitting on top of it. So we floated some life jackets out to him, and we got him out, and this couple came down to help us on it, and we had already gone when they put in the water.
Not realizing the emergency teams had gone, Dan and Linda Wilson courageously set out in their own small boat to help a stranger. But their good deed almost took their own lives when their craft capsized in the torrid waters. Dan Wilson was able to struggle ashore, but his wife was carried away by the rushing current. Several attempts to rescue her failed in the early morning hours, but hope continued. Linda could be heard screaming as she clung to a small tree. Time was the crucial factor. At 4 o'clock this morning, this larger boat was brought to challenge the current. Men strung themselves with rope to act as human anchors as rescuers in the boat fought the waters to reach Linda. Finally, an hour later, the ordeal was over. Shivering and numb from the cold, the stranded victim was at last safe and sound. Likewise, drenched rescuers had escaped the hazardous event without injury. For everyone, the tense hours of waiting and wondering had passed. For all three victims, a night that could have meant death brought a new day dawning. Carol Lambert, Action 4 in Weatherford.
Down there, I'll get something to walk through. Be good.
For John and Sandy Garrett, returning home after the flood was worse than leaving. Their personal belongings and their lives lay soaked and scattered across the front lawn.
I was praying for it to quit, but it never did until it got most everything. I seen it get higher and higher and started moving everything else higher and higher.
A kitchen doorway became a grimy yardstick to record the rising waters. They brought with them pounds and pounds of mud, which had to be swept away during the salvage.
I just figured everything was gone. I didn't really want to come back, but we had all this to do.
Tony Stizza, Action 4, Kingfisher, Oklahoma.
These students at Bishop McGuiness High School, like students at private schools everywhere, could save their parents some money if President Reagan gets his way. Reagan wants families with incomes of less than $50,000 to receive a tax credit of up to $100 in 1983 for each child they have in private elementary or secondary schools. The tax credit would increase to $400 in 1984 and up to $500 thereafter. Supporters of the plan say it would not violate the constitutional principle of separation of church and state because tax credits would go to parents, not schools. They emphasize that no credits would go to families who send their children to racially discriminatory schools. The principal at Bishop McGuiness says Reagan's plan increases educational options.
I see it as it giving the parents an opportunity, more parents an opportunity to participate in private education or Catholic schools that may at one time not have had this opportunity.
Reagan's plan may be popular here at Bishop McGuiness, but others don't like it. Opponents say it's like giving a tax break to people who drink Perrier because they're not using public water.
Opponents say Reagan's plan would drain money away from public schools like Northwest Classen High School. They contend public schools would be hurt because parents would be more willing to enroll their children in private schools. They also see a violation of the church-state principle since 80 to 90% of the private school students are in parochial school. And opponents see another problem.
There would be students going to schools that would be formed for the sole purpose of getting that credit so that they would be able to espouse their own value beliefs, whether those values are negative or positive, such as Ku Klux Klan schools, such as Mooney schools.
Bill Ross, Action 4 at the AFT offices.
Is not capable of giving instructions to
Well, it appears that the subcommittee wanted to greatly limit who would appear as witnesses to certain persons that they selected. We feel like we ought to be able to present any witness in rebuttal that we desire to bring. We believe that if they're going to bring a bunch of new allegations that are going to require a great deal of research, that we ought to have some insight as to what these allegations are so that we can rebut them. And we just feel like it ought to be an impartial hearing and not one that's stacked against us.
High winds swept through the area, severing limbs and uprooting a few trees. But the major damage was to this Army helicopter. One of the front rotor blades was sheared off, and the glass bubble of the cockpit was shattered. In addition, there was structural damage from stress caused by the powerful winds. Well, today, Army engineers are inspecting the craft to determine the full extent of the damage. They won't have a dollar estimate until all systems can be checked. The helicopter was tied down here on the runway with 4 steel straps. There's still speculation that a tornado actually touched down, but base personnel say gusts up to 85 miles per hour moved the craft some 80 yards. Despite the damage, flight operations at Fort Sill can carry on as usual.
With the damage that we had, the serious damage to the aircraft behind us and some other damage to 3 other aircraft, I expect within 2 days to have most of our aircraft back flying. In fact, there will be only 1 more that won't be available for flying than the total we had before the storm.
Jones added he was happy to report that no one on base was injured during the storm. Carol Lambert, Action 4 at Fort Sill.
This is usually the time of year when new homes begin sprouting up all over the city.
But with the rain we've had this spring, the only thing sprouting up is weeds. The heavy, constant moisture has the new home construction industry down to a crawl. The housing market has been slow lately, and many buyers are waiting to see finished products. Any slowdown in an already soft housing industry is double trouble.
So it's completely stopped all starts, and also has kept us from completing the homes that we have in inventory, which has caused great inconvenience for the people buying our homes, and many of them have termination dates on their leases, and they're practically getting kicked out in the streets, but we can't finish their houses for them.
Some construction workers are still swinging hammers. Leonard Walker is a finish carpenter and is lucky enough to work inside out of the rain. In fact, the wet weather is to Leonard's liking.
In a way, since we've got quite a few houses ahead of us, well, with the framers being down because of the rain, well, it gives us a chance to catch up. And that's just about what it all comes down to in the long run. Of course, now the framers is not helping them any.
Walker says he has two brothers who are out of work because of the wet weather. Thousands of workers across the state are scrambling to stay afloat economically because of weather-related layoffs. For them, dry weather won't come soon enough. Mark O'Neill, Action 4, Southwest Oklahoma City.
This Memorial Day will be pretty much like the last one, but if you're going out to recreate on the water, you may notice there's more of it this year. That has to do with all the rain, about 12 inches of it according to the U.S. Weather Service. All that water has inundated some beaches and campgrounds normally open for Memorial Day traffic, and that could cause a problem in some places. But if you plan ahead, you should be able to come up with an alternative.
Our state parks, in many respects, are in their best condition. As you can see, Oklahoma's green. It's all green country now with beautiful terrain. And while we do have some areas of the state that are inundated with water, most of our lakes are in good shape.
Having some fun on the beach is a good idea, but it would probably be wise to call ahead of time and make sure the beach is still there. Some popular campgrounds will just not be available this year, but look at the positive side. It gives you a chance to try a new spot. Ted Brown, Action 4 at the State Tourism Department.
If you're planning on driving this weekend for the Memorial Day holiday, you won't be alone. Thousands of Oklahomans will be on the road because this is the holiday that starts the summer. Vacationers aren't the only ones who'll be on the roads. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol will be working this weekend in full force around the clock. The patrolmen will be looking for those drivers that are speeding and driving recklessly. But their real goal is to stop the driver who is under the influence of alcohol or drugs.
I have no tolerance for the drinking driver. You know, if they're drinking, they're drunk, I cut no brakes. They know, they take the chance when they get out here and do it. So, they've had the opportunity to not do it by leaving the drinks at home or not getting out and driving. So once they get out, they've had their warning. They know what it's going to happen, and so they'll just have to live with the fact that they've been caught.
Trooper Wigington adds that the best holiday driving is defensive driving. If you watch the other guy as well as you watch yourself, you can expect a safe trip. As far as gas goes, AAA reports that you shouldn't have any problem getting it. And what's even better is it's going to be about 10 cents cheaper per gallon than it was last year. Sherry Sellers, Action 4.
The weekend began pleasantly enough with a canoe ride down the rain-swollen North Canadian River in far west Oklahoma County. But shortly after noon, the canoe that Oklahoma City police officer Ed Bradway and his family was riding in was drawn into a log jam and sucked under the water. Bradway and his wife were able to hold onto the logs until a companion in another canoe returned with help more than an hour later. But their son, 13-year-old Wes, has not been seen since.
All this log jam is up against this bank, but there's not much current back over here. This is sort of a stagnated area.
Probably swirling and coming back.
Right. He's probably come back into the center of the current, would be my guess.
As city rescue teams prepared to dive into the river looking for Wes, police crews took to the air, hoping the overhead advantage would turn up some clues of the boy's whereabouts. The river is high and its banks covered with trees, making a search from the ground impossible. By late afternoon, no clues had been found. Charles Schnitzer, Action 4, in far west Oklahoma County.
Rescue units came to the North Canadian River for the second straight day. Divers from the Oklahoma City Police and Fire Departments were searching for 13-year-old Wesley Bradway. On Saturday, Wesley, his parents, and some friends were canoeing on the Canadian River. Their canoes were swept into a huge log jam.
Watch out.
Everyone escaped except Wesley. On Sunday, divers began setting up charges to blow up the jam. An 8-pound charge was detonated at 1:30. It didn't loosen things up enough. The logs were just too big.
Well, it jumped about 6 foot in the air.
That was it.
And some of it come loose, but I didn't see that much of it float down.
How much you need?
You know, the big one that was laying across, it's still there.
The speed of the current, estimated at 10 miles an hour, also caused some problems.
It's all hanging on to just, it's so open down there, and the current is so hard and so fast that it's real hard on the big current. There's going to have to be 2 or 3 guys go down the big one and hold one guy, and the one guy going to have to do the time, because when you let go with your hands to tie, you're gone.
Demolition experts decided to try a 25-pound charge. This is as close as rescue officials would allow anyone to get to the log jam. Divers took boats around that bend and went to the log jam about a quarter of a mile downriver. It took about 40 minutes to set the second charge, and at 3:20, it went off. 3 more charges were set during the day, and while the log jam was pretty well broken, the body of Wesley Bradway still hasn't been found. Authorities had to give up about 7:30 with the approach of bad weather. They'll try again on Monday. Bill Ross, Action 4, along the North Canadian River.
Well, what happened? It was gorgeous yesterday, but today was the day everyone was supposed to be out enjoying the day off with hot summer fun on the water or with picnics in the park. If you're disappointed, just think how the ants must be suffering. But perfect weather or not, school's out, and some felt obligated to get the kids out of their house. That's one of the great things about children. They're not old enough yet to know what kind of weather messes up a holiday. They go right on doing what they do best, which is doing everything poorly. But you've got to give them credit for spunk, and to this gentleman too. Here's someone who isn't going to let a traditional lake holiday go by without getting on the lake. Or in the lake. At least he didn't have to worry about crowds. Ted Brown, Action 4 at Lake Hefner.